Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
Welcome, Alfred. Yeah. Today we have the wonderful opportunity to use these digital tools available to all of us to meet with alums all over the world. That's wonderful. And today we have the pleasure to have this chat with Alfred Posamentier. He is a Fulbright alum. He was a US Fulbright scholar here in Austria in 1991, Alfred. Is this correct?
Correct.
And we are still very well connected across the Atlantic because you are now in New York and we are here in Austria. So this mission Fulbright Austria has to promote mutual understanding and connect the peoples from the US and Austria is working really well. And with these new tools we have here, it's great that we can continue that relationship. So Alfred is the former dean from the City College of New York and was here at the University of Vienna as a visiting professor. And he already shared a small, secret with us, because we today actually what we do is we have a small coffee break here. So it's not a formal webinar, it's a coffee break. And he shared with us that his favorite coffee is a coffee latte. So with this, we start the coffee chat. Yeah? Alfred, please tell us a bit about you.
My gosh, what can I tell you? Many decades in the business, so to speak. I started off as I'm a Manhattan-born person. That's what's called a true New Yorker. And I began my career as a high school mathematics teacher in the Bronx for 6 years. And then I spent the next 40 years at City College as a professor of mathematics and mathematics education. And I was dean of the School of Education. And at the end of 40 years, I decided it was enough. And I went for 1 semester to the New York City College of Technology as a distinguished lecturer, and which is a kind of an honorary position. It's like the equivalent of a distinguished professor. But when you leave one professorship, you have to take that. And anyway, after 1 semester, the president of Mercy College met with me and asked me if I'd come over there and clean up and build up their School of Education, which I agreed to do for 5 years, and I did. And it was the only college in the United States that had dual certification from the 2 accreditation organizations. So it went from the bottom to the top, and I felt I did my thing. I then went to Long Island University for 2.5 years, where I spent time creating an international program for them. And now I'm back at New York City College of Technology, which is a branch of City University of New York, has 18,000 students. And if anybody's familiar with New York City, it is located at a most wonderful spot. If you walk over the Brooklyn Bridge, the first traffic light you get to, that's where it is. So it's a very good location. In other words, you can walk to City Hall by crossing over the bridge. Anyway, what I do now is mostly write books, and I guess best thing to do if you want to find out what those books are, put my name in the computer and it'll kick it up for you. In any case, that's my history, but I will tell you that my experience in Vienna was phenomenal, and I will tell you more about it because I'm sure Hermann is going to ask me about it.
Yeah, thank you, Alfred. Yeah, you wrote about 75 books. That's amazing. When I go and think about the past, it's also really interesting to know what brought people to apply for Fulbright. So, do you remember what the reason was why you applied, and
yes,
how did you find out about this?
Very good point. It may be different now, but I will tell you, in the 1980s, I by chance made contact with with people in Vienna at the university, and it was quite pleasant. We had invited a few faculty members from there to be visiting professors at City University. And at one point, Professor Rowlett, who is still somewhat active at the university, she's retired, but she still has an office. She insisted I come over there as a visiting professor. And then she suggested, why not do it through Fulbright, which I did. And I applied as everyone else does. And I was awarded the luxury of going over there. And I have to tell you, the results of that visit, and you know, everybody can make a visit fruitful or not fruitful. Mm-hmm. For example, one thing they did at the time, I don't know, Herman, if you're required your visitors to do that, was every person, and there were very few at the time, who came over to Austria was asked to give a talk to the general audience on something in the field or something of interest. And I said to myself, my gosh, what, nobody's really, people don't like mathematics, so I'm not going to talk about mathematics, although since then I've been doing quite a bit of that, but that's besides the point. I figured, you know, I'm coming from New York, and, you know, New Yorkers think in a certain way, which is a little bit peculiar. I said, I'll do a talk on what is New York really like. And I spent a little time before I went there photographing things. In those days, we used slides. And I photographed a police car, a school bus, a person on the street, this, that. And I gave a talk on what is New York really like. And the crowd they didn't know me from Adam, but the crowd that came in was enormous. They packed it the America House, which is on the side of the Parliament. They packed it standing room only. I mean, they didn't know me, but the topic was so interesting that they asked me to do a second one, which was also packed. So it was quite a very interesting experience. People at that time were interested in New York. I hope they still are. I mean, we had a bit of a problem with a president recently, so our popularity might have gone down a little bit, but that's besides the point. In any case, the results of my being there for that one semester did wonders. For example, I got to meet the Minister of Education. I got to meet the head of the school system in Vienna, with whom, and both those people I'm still friendly with today, although they're both obviously retired. And so many things came out of that. And there's one, just a very curious little story. At one point, I had some visiting students from Germany who came in and they wanted to study in New York. And I arranged for them to do it without cost, and they were so happy. And long story short, one of them's, the father of one of these young men was the number 2 person at Siemens Corporation. And he wanted to thank me in some way. So he said, look, when you get to Vienna, we'll have somebody from the company take you to dinner or lunch once a week at least. And it was very nice because, you know, you don't know people, and it's very nice. Long and the short of it was, for the next 10 years or so, Siemens sponsored math conferences that we organized, international conferences that we organized in Vienna. And it was really a wonderful experience where it brought people in from all over the world, and especially from the East Bloc. There were people coming in from East Germany who had never been across the border. And they were just absolutely floored with the experience. So we did some, and then of course, you may have read about this. This was front page New York Times. In 1998, New York City had a tremendous shortage of math and science teachers. And because of the contacts that I made during my Fulbright experience, we were able to bring, with the help of the Ministry of Education there, in the next 10 years, from 1998 to 08, we brought in over 750 math teachers from Austria to teach in New York City schools, public high schools. So there are lots of great things that can happen. And it's all a matter of an individual interest and taste. Obviously, you can go there and spend the whole time in your hotel room and see nobody and talk to nobody, and you might as well stay home if you're going to do that. The whole kick is, if you are going over there, or if you've been there, the trick is to make as much contact as you can, get international publications going. I mean, I can tell you a number. I've organized Fulbright for many, many people over the last 20 or so years, where I organize them or help them apply, help them find a place that makes sense. And many of them did publishing that was successful in large measure because they met people in another country with whom they were able to joint author something, and that something, when it, you know, when you have a person from the United States and a person from Austria giving two different perceptions, it's very interesting, whether it's a research study in chemistry or physics, or it's a study in history or language arts or whatever, or education. It's always interesting when you get different perspectives.
Absolutely,
Did I
absolutely.
say too much?
No, no, that's why we're here. We want to hear you.
Okay.
I mean, we are currently just finishing the application cycle for the new scholars coming to Austria next year,
Right.
and the next applicants already prepared the application. This is like now they submit it with their iPad or computer. What was it like in the past in 1990 to submit an application to the Fulbright program? I mean, iPads were not available, huh?
No. That's a very good question, because it was just the time when faxes started. It was just the time. Today, you don't even know what a fax is anymore. Although we should know that the fax did not originate then. It was used in World War II to send weather maps back and forth. But a fax was only as good as two people having the same machine. In other words, if you have a telephone, nobody else had a telephone, it's no good. So anyway, what I did was I had to rent an apartment. And it was interesting because I rented an apartment about very, very close to the university in the Herlgasse. And the person from whom I rented was very interesting. Carl Dolmetsch was his name. And he was an American who owned an apartment there and spent 1/2 a year in Virginia and 1/2 a year in Vienna. And when he wasn't there, he rented his apartment to me. And he, as a matter of fact, he wrote a very interesting book, and I would recommend it to anybody who's interested. It's called Our Famous Guest in Vienna, Mark Twain. Mark Twain spent 1.5 years in Vienna in around 1900. And this guy Dolmetsch wrote the only book that's so much. Mark Twain did so much when he was in Vienna, and it's hardly ever recorded in any of the biographies of Mark Twain for reasons that I don't understand. So it's a good book. It's called Our Famous Guest, Mark Twain in Vienna. You might want to look it up. It's in English and in German. In any case, to answer your question, I did bring a fax machine over, but here was the interesting thing. The apartment had a party line. I don't know if the young folks know what a party line is. A party line is when two families share one phone line. And I had to change that phone to a single line so that I could hook up the fax machine to it. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So, you know, I was aware we had a computer. I brought a computer with me, but it was very, very primitive compared to what we have today.
So I can imagine that also, like, it was difficult to get in touch with the university before it, just calling by phone, no email available, things like that. A real adventure, actually.
Well, I can tell you, if you go back a little further, my younger brother also was a Fulbrighter in geology, and he spent a year in Vienna. And at that time, there was no way you could call directly from New York to Vienna. It just didn't work. You couldn't do it. You had to call either through Germany or through Switzerland. They would then hook you up. And fortunately, I shouldn't really say this publicly, fortunately, I had a student at City College who worked on the weekends at night for the telephone company. And he told me after midnight, if I call him, he will connect me directly, not to Vienna, but through one of the other countries. And I would speak to my brother for hours on end. He was in Vienna, I was in New York, and it didn't cost me anything because he made the hookup. but in those days you couldn't call directly from New York to Vienna, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's why we are so happy to have all these tools now available to
Yes.
connect US and Austria, like you with all the community members here. And I mean, I can also imagine that such a trip to go on such an adventure, you had to prepare for that. So what did you do to prepare for your time in Austria?
Well, it was interesting because they told me in advance the kinds of things that they would want me to do. And of course, I did much, much more than what was originally planned. I brought along books and whatever I needed, and I had no problem with that. But the interesting thing was that, and I suggest this to future Fulbrighters, that the more you get out there and meet people, the more interesting things will occur for you. For example, here I am, math is my field. All of a sudden, at the University of Vienna, a small cohort of professors come to me and said, listen, we'd like to know if you could help us out. I said, what is it? Well, we have a bunch of school psychologists who would like to meet with you. I said, listen, I'm sorry, but I'm not a psychologist. I don't know why. No, you don't understand. A school psychologist in Vienna is a person who helps teachers improve their teaching. I said, well, I could try that. And what are they teaching? Well, it's elementary school. Well, that's not exactly my field, but I'll be happy to meet with them. Well, it was so interesting. I met with this group of maybe 8 or 9. They were adults. And I said, how can I help you? Sat around a table. And they said, well, we have trouble with our teachers teaching arithmetic. I said, oh, well, what do you mean? Well, for example, subtraction is very difficult for our teachers for whatever the reason. I said, well, why don't you come? Now, I knew partly what the problem might have been, because in the world of mathematics, what's in the literature called the Austrian method of subtraction is very different from the way the Americans do it. So I called one woman up to the board, had a little chalkboard there, and I said, why don't you show the group how you subtract these two numbers? I put 2 3-digit numbers up there. And she went, blah, 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 blah. I said, oh, that's good. Now, can you tell me why that works? No, it just works. We know exactly. I said, but don't you know why? No. Well, I showed them why it worked, and they look, oh my God, we never knew that. The reason for this algorithm. I said, let me show you what we do in the United States, where we borrow from one and so on. And they said, my God, that's so logical. Then no one ever showed us that. So, I mean, not that I changed anything, but it was an interesting experience that I would never have had. And it enriched me because it gave me a better feeling for what other people do in other parts of the world, which is really that Fulbright experience is immeasurable in terms of how you can grow as long as you're willing to do it. If you, as I said earlier, if you lock yourself into a hotel room after you do your obligated things, you're going to be a loser. You don't want to do that. Even if you just sit in a coffee house. The interesting thing in Vienna in the coffee houses, you can sit there the entire day and they will never bother you. They'll give you newspapers hanging up there to read and everything. As long as you order 1 cup of coffee, you can stay there the whole day. In New York or in the United States, if you go to a diner and you're there for an hour, say, sir, we need the table. There are people waiting there. They'd never do that in Austria. You can sit there forever. And I know people there who every single day go to a newspaper, to a coffee house, same table, sit there, read the newspaper, and have their cup of coffee. And not like in the United States where you go in, you have a cup of coffee. Can I pour some more? Can I pour some more? No. You want second cup of coffee? You're paying for the second cup of coffee. So there are differences, but it's fun.
Absolutely. I mean, you touched a bit on that already. You mentioned that it's important if you do your Fulbright to go out and expose yourself to the community in the country you are. what other tips, what other suggestions do you have for future Fulbrighters?
Well,
what's important for them?
The most important thing is to prepare yourself in advance. If you've never been to the country you're going to, in this case Austria, it would be very wise to read a little bit about the history of Austria, read a little bit and see what's going on, maybe even touch on the politics. They're not as crazy as the politics in the United States, so it's easier to grasp. Look at the kind of government. It's a more socialized country than the United States. They have socialized medicine, and students don't pay for the university in some areas. So there are many differences, but it's good to be prepared before you go there. And I can tell you, I've sent students over there to study, and there's one right now at the Module University. He loves it. Mm-hmm. He's a kid. He must be about maybe 19, 20 years old. He's already got a girlfriend. He's happy as he couldn't be happier. And that's one of the universities where they teach in English. So I think there are three now: the Webster, the Soros School, whatever that's called, the one that moved over from Hungary, and the Module University. So there are three that teach in English. But I will tell you one thing: most of the universities now in Austria have a good portion of what they do in the English language, because, and I was told this by a number of high school principals in Austria, the most important subject is not mathematics, sorry to say that, but it's English. And so every young kid can speak English, and I'd say anybody under 50 can speak English well.
Yeah, that's also because we have some wonderful US teaching assistants here from the US in the Austrian schools who teach our kids English. And that's I think where we are really thankful and grateful for, to get this kind of support from the US side in the Austrian schools. Yeah? You mentioned already about being prepared. That's an important thing. So also we are prepared, and Mitch Sims is the person who organized the meeting here and helped us to get all the technology running. And he reached out to the people here in the audience before and has prepared some questions for you from them. So I would like to ask Mitch to jump in and provide you with the opportunity to answer them.
Okay, fire away.
Hi, Mitch.
Hello, Alfred. Great to see you, and glad that you could join us. You were actually talking about the Austrian method of subtraction, and one of our alums would like to know a little bit more about that. If you could explain it a little bit more about the Austrian method of subtraction.
Well, one thing that they do, which is different from the way we do it in New York, I assume that New York is typical of the rest of the country, I'm not sure, but they add to the bottom number to get to the top. In other words, they instead of what we say, this minus this, they say, what do I have to add to the bottom of those two numbers to get to the top one? Without drawing this on a board, it's very difficult to explain, but that's the basic difference.
We also have another question. What do you feel is a quality all Fulbrighters gain during their Fulbright experience?
Immeasurable. It's very difficult to measure sometimes personal growth. If you say, well, how much did I improve from when I was 40 to now or so, it's very difficult. You have there are so many experiences that you get when you're there, how people act to one another. I'll be nasty now. I'm going to say something nasty, and I hope Herman will not cut me off. But for example, there's a certain level of friendliness in Austria, which you don't see in New York. In New York, when you walk past someone in a supermarket, they won't even look at you. In California, they'll greet you, but it won't mean much. It may. In some parts of the United States, it'll be a genuine greeting. In Austria, they'll always greet, but you don't know if it's real or not. Or here's another one. When you have a meeting in Austria, and I won't say everywhere, but a lot of meetings, you don't start off immediately with the topic at hand. You start off with small talk. And just how's the weather? Did you have trouble getting here? Did you find, stupid little things, which is, not something that's necessarily done in New York City, where we're businesslike. But these are little things that you gain culturally. You gain professionally by finding out how people on the other side of the world do things, and that's professionally very helpful and useful. And you make new contacts and friendships. And I think it's the personal growth. A lot of times I speak to younger folks very often, and I say to them, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the world by any stretch of the imagination, but I have so much experience, and that's useful, the experience. And that's something you can't buy. You can't go to take a course on experience. You have to experience it. And that's what the Fulbright thing was able to do for me.
Thank you so much, Alfred. We have one more question and we're running out of time, so we'll finish up with this question. The last question, what do you consider to be the biggest challenge or challenges for education in the US and Austria right now?
Well, as best I can tell, right now, the biggest challenge is the pandemic. I mean, that's a no-brainer, as we say. I think the challenge that will be ahead of us now is because of this pandemic and because of people learning or studying or working online, the question is going to come up, what is the role of technology in the future? Now, obviously, in several months, I hope this whole thing will be fading away and we'll get back to normalcy. And the question is, to what extent are we going to be reliant on technology, if at all? I personally think I've run seminars and classes online. I gave a lecture last week online. It's very upsetting to me because just like now, you see me, but I don't see you, all of you folks there. And it's very difficult to talk to people where you can't see their reactions. And so that's one thing that I think is going to be a question to be answered, is that to what extent technology will play a role in our future education. It could be that it's so much more improved over the next couple of years that it becomes part of life. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I mean, right now, the electric cars are coming in hand over fist. Everybody's looking at them as the future. If I had a crystal ball, I'd know where we were going. If you look back 30 years, 40 years, no one would ever think of being where we are today. The whole internet, this computer. The other day I went to a local library and I wanted to donate an encyclopedia. And they looked at me and said, no, we don't want it. I said, but it's in perfect condition. No, we don't need it. I said, but why? She says, you see over there, and she points over there, you see those encyclopedias? No one ever touches them. And this is a very popular library because the computer is your encyclopedia today. Even Britannica has a site. So, I mean, life is changing. People, and I will tell you this, even the email is slowly fading. Students do not look at the email as much as they look at texting. I mean, one of my colleagues sent a memo out to a whole bunch of students by email, and the response was very modest. He then sent the same thing out on text, and everybody responded. I mean, it's amazing. The fax doesn't exist anymore, hardly. We scan. Legal documents can be scanned, no problem. It's a legal document's good enough because it retains the color of the ink. It's just that technology is something we don't know where we're going with it. and what effect it's going to have. I personally like to be in a class with people I can talk to, I can look at, I can react to their reactions and so on. But who knows if that's going to be the case in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, thinking about what the technology helps us to do, and on the other hand, what we're missing by not having this personal contact with a human being, those have to be balanced. And I'm sure there will be much development on how to integrate the technology into the classroom to have both, actually. So time flies, and it's amazing how many questions we could answer with all this 30 minutes actually only. But we are really grateful and thankful for you donating your time and energy to the community here. You were the first in our Alumschat approach on our series of Alumschats. We will start off with this, and the first is always the most difficult, I would say. So it's really, really wonderful that you started it off with us, because we were in good hands with you. So thank you. And the next Alums Chat will be in February, and I hope, Alfred, you also join us there. Julia Pataki will present her experience as as an Austrian student in the US, and I am looking forward to this amazing opportunity. So with this, thank you, and I hope you all enjoy the coffee. See you soon. Bye-bye.